a country that remained predominantly rural until the 1950s, rural unemployment had become endemic. The suppression of civil liberties and the excessive concentration of wealth during the Porfiriato, name given to the years of the Porfirio Diaz dictatorship, 1876 to 1910, polarized Mexican society and eventually led to the bitter and destructive factional wars collectively known as the Mexican Revolution.
When the fascist Italian attacked and annexed Ethiopia in 1935, Mexico was part of the countries making the economic blockade against Italy, suspending the export of coal, oil, iron, and other Mexican products to that country and avoiding buying Italian items. In the case of Czechoslovakia, Austria, and other countries invaded by Germany, Mexico always recognized the refugees from legitimate governments in exile in 1940 and supported with particular strength the case of Spain Republica. But Mexico's neutrality in World War II had to change and decide his position to influence situations of geographical, political, and economic character, as were the proximity to the United States. The solution given by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the oil problem of Mexico, the need for the Allies to have Mexican oil for war, and the country's economic recovery. Upon the attack by Japan against the United States on December 7th of 1941, the Mexican government, fulfilling the commitments made by the international conferences, broke diplomatic relations with Japan on December 8, 1941, and 3 days later with Italy and Germany. On May 22, 1942, after the sinking of 2 Mexican oil ships by German submarines, the Mexican Congress declared a war against Germany, Italy, and Japan. 15,000 Mexican soldiers fought in World War II with the very important participation of 233 Squadron 201 airline pilots. In June of that year, Mexico signed the Declaration of the United Nations, and late 1942, he negotiated a trade agreement between Mexico and the United States, which established mutual tariff concessions. The total military cooperation between the two nations took effect in 1943, when it was agreed that each country could enlist in his army 2 nationals of another country to live within its borders. Other wartime projects included the creation of a joint commission for economic cooperation, established to find ways to heal the shortage of food and strategic materials, and Mexican-American Industrial Commission oriented industrialization program of Mexico. In return, the United States requested manpower to fill the position of soldiers who had gone to fight and open its borders to 300,000 Mexican workers. In 1944, Mexico oil companies paid $24 million plus interest at 3% oil properties expropriated in 1938.
After World War II, Mexico gets the opportunity to build an economic project that will give them economic growth in the long term, thanks to the opening of the great powers toward Latin American economies after the conflict. Mexico's industrializing process had stopped during the government of Porfirio Diaz due to the Mexican Revolution. It was not until Avila's government that Mexico could restructure its economical growth and industrialization process. After the war, during the government of Miguel Alemán, the rural area of Mexico grew thanks to subsidies and credit aids. But this growth was slowed by the corruption of the government functionaries.
Mexico in June 1945 became one of the founding members of the United Nations organization. A year later, in 1946, Miguel Alemán Valdés succeeded as president, having been elected on a platform with a political program whose objectives were the equitable distribution of wealth, conducting extensive irrigation works, and greater industrialization of the country.
Germany maintained close relations with the United States. In 1947, the Export-Import Bank provided $50 million to be invested in public works and industrial development. Later that year, the Mexican government announced that German and British oil companies demanding $250 million for the property expropriated had agreed to pay $21 million. In 1948, the government, trying to reverse the unfavorable balance of trade, devalued the peso. Non-essential imports for industrial development were significantly restricted. In March 1949, for the first time since 1938, exportations allowed two American oil companies to drill under the supervision of Pemex. On July 3, 1949, elections were held and the ruling party, known since then as the Institutional Revolutionary Party, won an absolute majority in the Chamber of Deputies. Finally, Mexico had a healthy surplus after the war, and Alemán launched a number of large public works projects such as the Morelos and Falcon dams, which helped increase agricultural output, irrigate vast tracts of land, and tripled Mexico's electrical capacity by 1952. The railway was improved and the Mexican segment of the Pan American Highway was finished in 1951. Women were allowed to vote in 1952. Pemex built new refineries and pipeline and doubled its production from 1946 to 1952. Alemán used his influence to help bring the 1968 Olympics to Mexico.
Como si fueras mi hermana, quiero oír en tu voz quién fue el amor de la araña.